right? So funk is the lineage of music that I come from. Like Z funk comes after G funk, comes after P funk, right? And so like there's a straight line to me. But so funk is a style of music which is dance music. And so there's this sense of like, if you know where the beat is, then you can put your booty in the spot where your booty's supposed to be at in that moment. And so it's because you have this understanding of rhythm and timing that you can put yourself in that place. And so when I think about astrology, I think about trying to dance with the rhythm of the cosmos in the same way that I would dance to music.
Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead. One of many things I'm grateful for about being a witch, as well as now in this modern age, a podcaster, is the phenomenally talented, exceptionally interesting people I get to meet and become friends and colleagues with. One of those people is my guest today, the astrologer and musician ZamboniFunk. If you don't yet know him, you'll want to follow him on Instagram for his daily astrological looks ahead, and he also both does readings for individuals and has an excellent Patreon where he offers monthly electional reports. He is also a fellow musician, and in our conversation today we talk a great deal about the magic of time, rhythm, dealing with challenges in charts, and how to integrate astrology into our daily lives. There are also some links in the show notes that relate to what we discuss here, the magic of synchronization and metronomes, John Stuart Reid, and a few other things, as well as, of course, links to Zamboni's offerings and sites. Before we get started, a quick note to say, if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to the podcast, share it with friends, and leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts. You can also find more information about the show on our website at coffeeanddivination.com, or you can find me on Instagram. Enjoy. It is so lovely to have you here. My guest today is ZamboniFunk, and he is a friend of mine and someone I've been looking forward to having on the show for quite a while now. So I'm very glad that you can join us. And it's lovely to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. I am delighted. I've listened to several of your episodes, and what a joy it is to join the ranks.
Lovely. So our question that I usually ask for people who are on the podcast the first time is, since this podcast revolves around divination, the question is really, what was your first entryway into divination? You are, a professional astrologer. That could be, when you became interested in astrology, or it could be like, oh yeah, I had a crazy aunt who always read tea leaves, or, I was introduced to tarot when I was really little, or it could be like, I found it when I was, 25 or whatever. But what was your entry point into this?
Yeah, I didn't have like grown people who were interested in that in my life in my childhood. So I grew up deeply religious, but like also thinking that magic wasn't a real thing. So there was like a conflict there in my head, in my heart. And so then when I stopped being that style of religious, then there was a big void for me. I just didn't have I didn't know how to make sense of the world or myself or anything else really. And then there came a time in, when was that? 2017 or something like this, when I drank some ayahuasca, and it made it clear that the world was not as I had been told it was. And so then so it sort of just broke open the whole world. It was like, okay, so anything is kind of possible out here. And so up to that point, I had been studying astrology sort of as an enthusiast. My plan wasn't to be an astrologer at that time, but I was just sort of like reading up on astrology. And I love purple things just kind of generally. And a lot of astrology books are purple. So I started reading some astrology books because they looked good with my outfit. and so I was already doing that. and then drank this ayahuasca, and it became clear that like spirits were real and magic was real and this kind of thing. And it was like, okay, so I guess astrology is good magic for knowing things. And so I sort of started in with that ever since that point, just kind of like trying to find better ways of reconnaissance, just like getting to know what's happening in the world and how it's happening. And then I started getting into like cycle models generally, just like this idea of not linear time, but cyclical time and this kind of thing, and sort of just got into it. Also, before that, I've been deeply interested in what even am a question for a really long time. Like that, I've been interested in since childhood and had no real reason to have that interest. And no one else was interested in it. And nobody wanted to hear me like being weird about that. But, but yes, trying to figure out what a good question is and the kind of space that opens up when you ask a good question has been an interest of mine for a long time. And so then when you come into astrology or tarot or whatever other kind of divination forms you want, then the art of asking a question is really important in that. And so I found a natural home there.
Um, so what is a good question? I figure this was not, kind of where I would have taken the interview right away, but what even am a question then?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I mean, a question is an opening, it's a way in. And it is one thing that I really love about the interrogative form is that it is not, by definition, it is not declarative. And so there's usually some kind of embedded assumption. There's some kind of like I'm asking this question because I think that such and such a thing is already happening, is already taking place. And so based on that, then what about this other thing, right? So there are some baseline assumptions there, but it's not trying to tell you that a thing is or is not true. And I really love the sort of liminality of that and the space that I have to sort of just figure things out. One of the hallmarks of my practice, I like to think, is that I'm pretty humble about things. I don't think that I have it right. And so because of that, then often an appropriate form for me is to ask a question about it. Like, what if it were true that blank? Not rather than saying it is true that blank, then if I ask what if it were true, then I can explore what that is as a thought experiment. And I don't necessarily have to cast my lot over there. I don't have to join that team. I can simply explore. And so a question is an invitation to explore. It also might be the nature of the universe.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's kind of twofold in that uh, by asking, it's the sometimes I've had people when I talk about the podcast and my practice of divination, I've had magicians express that they are sometimes concerned about divining because they are concerned about then locking in some sort of fate that they don't like. Because it is
Hmm.
true, kind of as what you're saying, like in how you pose the question, you are creating something. But I like that you are also framing it
Hmm.
as a way of not necessarily throwing your lot in with it, that it is still an exploration. So you are not wedded to anything just because you have asked a question in a certain way or at a certain time, because you can ask another question. You can change your fate after that. Would you say is that kind of in line with what you were talking about?
I don't know if you can ever change your fate.
Mhm.
I'm on team astrology over here, so like the stars are what they are,
Going to
you
be my
know.
next question. So yes.
So like, and it's hard to know. It's hard, like this is like the question about reincarnation. It's like, do I think reincarnation is a real thing? It's like, it depends on the day. It depends on how, like how it falls today. Today, I happen to be in a fairly predestined kind of camp with things, you know. It doesn't, like one of my favorite ways to think about it is that the river is flowing downstream. Now that doesn't mean that you can't decide to be on this or that side of the river. You can like make decisions, but you're at no point going to go upstream. And
Hmm.
so even if you paddle as hard as, you're not going to out paddle the river, right? And so you can change your fate in the sense of like you can move around from here to there. But with this same sort of situation in mind here, I don't think that asking a certain question takes you out of the river or puts you into the river, right? You were in the river beforehand and you were in the river afterward. And so asking a question doesn't seal your fate. If your fate was already sealed, you know what I mean?
Hmm. And
So,
there's also, yeah, yeah. It's just that also I think that our words are a little bit limiting because we have so few to try to talk about things that are very nuanced. And then we just use
sure.
one big word like fate for something that in other cultures, like for Norse practice, there's like different forms of things that are,
Hmm.
fated at various levels. So you can have things that are more changeable and things that are less changeable. They're all fate, quote unquote, but some are much more fixed than others, and I think the Greeks as well. So yeah, so you have the river, and then what you can do where you are on the river.
Totally, totally. And the river is fairly wide,
Yeah.
like, if we're thinking astrologically, then, any given placement, and it'll be a sign or it'll be a planet in a house in a sign, maybe making aspect to some other planet, right? And that each one of those things can be interpreted myriad ways. And then that particular placement can also come out in myriad ways. Like everyone is under the same transits at all times, right? But they look really different for you than they do for me, than they do for other people. Like people in Gaza are living a very different representation of these transits than I am. And it's always going to feel it's always going to come back and be right in some kind of way, right? So the river is very wide. There's a lot of variation. There's a lot you can do with it. You just have to commit to going downstream.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of going back to what you were talking about, the question, when you are looking at someone's chart, I remember when I've spoken to people about palmistry, sometimes I've had a question in conversation with several different people about how sometimes people get very overly focused on their own hand, and they're just very interested in looking at the lines on their own hand. And there's a little bit of um, too much focus on simply what is going on with the self. And that's
Hmm.
a product of it's obviously what we're interested in. Of course, we need to understand ourselves, and we're all know thyself, as the oracle was always saying. First and foremost, you have to be focused on that for a reason. But then you also have to be able to take the reflections from elsewhere. So, in terms of when you look at someone's chart, you are kind of asking the question of sort of who are they? How do you think about interpreting a chart um, in the sense that you need to get a baseline picture, but still how you look at a chart, I'm assuming kind of does change a little bit how you're going to present it to someone. So how do you try to get that full picture in something that's so large and obviously depends a lot on context, as you were just saying?
Hmm. Well, I wouldn't at any point try to draw the whole picture.
Hmm.
It is beyond my ability to do that. The
Hmm.
only way to draw the full picture is to take that person's whole life and to live it in real time. That's the only way that that picture gets drawn in completeness. And so I wouldn't try to do that. That's the beauty of houses. You know what I mean? So like, if someone, and that's the beauty of the question as well, right? So if we can identify a strong question beforehand, then we can be like, okay, well, what does the chart have to say about this question? And then we look specifically at what's going on there, and we can take a look at some of the broader context and this kind of thing. And then, Gordon White will talk about how very important it is to look at historical context as well, right? Like a Saturn Mars opposition might look different in this current economy than it did like in the Mongolian Empire or something like this, right? Like, so you've got to be aware of where you are in time and where you are in space and the political environment and the cost of lumber and shit like this. But um, you know, so you know, one thing that I say a lot about eclipses, which we're currently in eclipse season, and I think that it's just kind of relevant generally, is that your arms are too short to box with dragons, right? And so you don't have to. You don't have to you don't have to like get into that arena in the first place. You don't have to, you're going to lose that boxing match, right? And so you don't have to do all of everything. You don't have to pretend like you're God and you know everything. All you have to do is answer the question in a relevant sort of way, you know, in a way that is resonant to whoever is asking the question.
Yes, and that immediately takes us into how we work with timing and what is found in our chart. You mentioned that this is eclipse season. Is there anything in particular? This will be released pretty soon after we complete this interview. Is there anything in particular around this time that you think you'd want to share, since we just brought that up at this particular juncture?
Sure. Well, I mean, so the eclipses are kind of funny. So eclipses by their nature are shadowy, right? They are moments of shadow, of darkness, and there can be some uncertainty and some kind of like, ooh, what's like going on in this space kind of situation, right? And you know, if you've ever experienced an eclipse in life on the land, then you know it's a moment when it gets dark in the daytime and nighttime bugs come out at noon, and you're like, what is going on? It feels really weird and liminal, right? And so that is happening in Aries and Libra, wherever that is in your chart. So I think that this is really interesting because, so if we think about Aries as being associated with like the Emperor, for example, in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, or this sense of like being one's own boss in whatever way it is, you know, I like to think about Aries as being like kind of like the first shoots of springtime, like, yes, here I am, hello, the party can start because now I'm here. You know, like this is the kind of way that Aries likes to get down. Also, the sun is exalted in Aries, so the sun is the king or the sovereign, the king, the one that is sort of like, this little light of mine is the thing that wants to shine out into the world, the sense of who I am that comes out of my face and my eyes and this kind of thing, right? So that is then being darkened in some kind of way where we can see, and it's on the north node, so the north node tends to want to do more. We can think about the like head of the dragon, the mouth, it's like, and the head has been severed from the tail, right? So there's this sense of like it's a little hungry ghosty, it like wants more. It can be a little greedy or something like this, right? And so I think that this is really interesting in a moment where, like, even right now I've got like lights shining on me and a camera in my face and this kind of thing, right? And that is kind of the zeitgeist of the moment. And so at the same time, we are looking at, you know, so in January, Pluto's going to move back into Aquarius, and it's not, and so Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for like 15 years or longer. I can't remember exactly, maybe 20. Um, and so throughout this whole time of Pluto in Aquarius, I definitely would expect, you know, like the last time we saw Pluto in Aquarius, and it was just a little toe dip. So Pluto's back in Capricorn right now, but Pluto will be back in Aquarius for most of the year next year, and we'll do another little toe dip back into Capricorn and then forward again. But so on this last go round, there was a lot of striking fear around artificial intelligence and machine learning, and like, are the machines coming to take over the world, and all of this kind of thing, you know. And so that, at the same time that there's a darkening around the face or the one's own personal sovereignty, one's ability to sort of like cut through and do my thing the way that I want to. Um, you know, it looks really good for weird information. It looks really good for like power dynamics shifting in a major way, especially around like one's ability to trust the talking heads that you've got on the screen and this kind of thing. So, especially in this political environment as well, right? Because it's important to remember that we are in a certain place in history as well as being under the stars that are shaped a certain kind of way. So in this political environment, then we can already see how trust in governments and media networks and this kind of thing has already eroded in a major way, and it continues to do so. We live in the era of the clown, right? Somehow or another, a meathead comedian became the single most powerful journalist in the world. Like, how, where are we in life right now? What is this, you know? And yet we live here. And so so there's this like really, so things get real weird, you know, and we are in a moment now where things are getting weird, and they're getting weirder all the time, and there's a kind of fear of that specter that I think is likely to show up here. We can also see that at the very same time, we've got Neptune and Saturn in Pisces. And so that means that every time that Mercury goes, Mercury is the planet of communication and information and journalism and making, so it's like the sun is the central thing. It's the thing that the self, the source, the light, this little light of mine, right? Then one planet out from that is Mercury. And so it's Mercury's job to take that light and translate it for everyone else. It's the one that makes the sort of source information intelligible to others. That's what communication is. That's what words are, right? I can take what the thoughts that I have in my head and I can say words so that you can understand them as well, right? That's Mercury's job. So Mercury loves being in Gemini and Virgo. Those are strong places for Mercury to be. So as Mercury moves through either Gemini or Virgo, then we're going to see hard aspects to Neptune and Saturn in Pisces. So this looks really difficult for strong, effective communication. It looks really difficult to take information and make it intelligible in some kind of way. So coming back around to artificial intelligence or the machines or the screen images and all this sort of stuff that comes around here, it's difficult there's like a too much information situation going on here. If there's so much information, it's hard to know what is true. It starts to be like, well, what even am true? Like, is true a real thing anymore, or has it ever been true or a thing? And like, so then it turns into this sort of weirdness. We can think about the liminality of nighttime bugs in the daytime, right? So one thing that I think is really useful to remember at a time like that is that in that liminal space, there's a different kind of opportunity than was available when things were deeply and strongly structured. In the era of Walter Cronkite, when everyone believed Walter Cronkite about whatever was going on in the world, then certain opportunities were not available because the power structure was in place. Now there's a changing dynamic that makes it possible to challenge that power structure or undermine that power structure in a way that I think is likely to be important and salient, especially once we start to look at Uranus moving through Taurus, and then Jupiter's coming up to hang out with that Uranus as well. So Uranus for a long time has been sort of a thorn in the side of the authorities, especially in Taurus. There's been this kind of like disruption of economic systems and the ways that we find value and food and like the very like sort of basic things. Like while Uranus has been in Taurus, we had a whole we couldn't hug anybody anymore for a second, you know what I mean? Which Taurus loves the hugs and this kind of, there's a certain kind of like basic element that goes along with Taurus, and Uranus has been disrupting that for a long time. We've also seen labor movements and this kind of thing showing up here, right? So Jupiter's job is to say yes to things. And so Jupiter next year in, I think May, is going to come up and conjoin that Uranus there in Taurus as well, saying yes to the Uranus things, to the disruption, to the changes in the status quo or the very basic things that are going on here. So that in the context of eclipses that are taking place across the face, shadows across the face, and that at the same time as too much information, and maybe there's a fear around the specter of machines and whatever else. This looks like a moment where there's lots of important change taking place here, but for for the magician, or for the the kinds of people who I imagine listen to this podcast, they might be like edge dwellers or shadow dwellers or this kind of thing. The occult, right, is the thing that like you can't see, it's hidden or something like this. So for those kinds of folks who are willing to inhabit that space, there might be a moment to come out in the daytime that could be an interesting way to approach power.
Yes, and I think that that goes straight back to kind of what we were talking about with the river. You're not denying that the river is flowing in a certain direction. We're not saying, nope, 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 that turn in the river is not happening. No, it's just
Right, we're
where
not
our,
going back to the 90s.
yeah. Um, but how we orient ourselves. And yes, I think that what we are talking about does immediately go towards the magical aspects of a thing, which is kind of coming up with creative edge-like ways of playing with these, unfortunately, sometimes very disruptive, and hopefully we can find positive outflows and creative ways to help ourselves and each other through it. Not that that's always possible, not to be, denial of it, but that we do have,
Creativity is always
yeah,
possible.
creativity is always possible. Um, I completely agree. So with that, I remember we were both presenting at the Plant Cunning Podcast, the conference that they had, which was
Totally.
fantastic earlier this summer. And because I got to go to your talk, which was lovely, and there were some interesting questions that came up regarding dealing with difficult aspects in a chart, or particularly in one's life position and one's chart. In that talk, you were talking more about health concerns because that was kind of more the outflow of things at that particular conference. And I really liked how you spoke about that. I think it flows nicely into what we were just saying about finding creative ways to deal with this. And can you talk a little bit about the malefic planets and kind of how you view finding good outlets for them when they are in challenging positions, shall we say?
For sure. Yeah. Well, so it's important to remember that so malefics are, it's one of the things that I like to always sort of think about is malefics. So that mal means bad, right, or evil, and benefics, the ben means good, right? And so you start to think about Saturn and Mars as evildoers, right? And another thing that sort of came out of my visionary practice with ayahuasca was that good and evil don't seem to really be real things. They're at least relative concepts. Like it's the meme where you've got the bear eating the salmon, and in a documentary about bears you're like, yeah, and in a documentary about salmon you're like, oh no. Right. And so it's all very relative about who's having a good day and who's having a bad day, right? And
Mhm.
so it's important to remember this around benefics and malefics as well, right? So rather than thinking of them as good and evil, I tend to like to think about benefics as being comfortable and malefics as being uncomfortable. So you like the things that benefics bring, and you don't like the things that malefics bring. Now, that is not to say that good things can't happen when you are uncomfortable. Sometimes you got to get that ass up off the couch and go handle your business, right? And it's not comfortable to do that. It's not fun to do that. It's not something that you want to do, but it's the best thing for you. And other times, maybe you should not eat quite so many sweets, even though they're so delicious, right? And so this is an important thing to remember here whenever we're looking at malefics who are prominently placed or something like this, right? Maybe you've got like Saturn on the rising or something like this, right? And so then it's like, oh, am I doomed for all life? And yes, because people are doomed, right? but but Saturn, like, so Saturn especially will make you feel that way, right? Saturn is will make you feel like, oh, it's just this is just my life now, and it's just terrible for all times, right? And one of my favorite things to remember is that Valens said that, Vedius Valens said that in the 2nd century. So like, and it feels like it's going to be forever. And so this is something that people have been dealing with for 2000 years or longer, right? This sense of like, oh, I guess it's just there's no hope for me anymore, right? Like that's, I feel you, I see that, but like there's more to this. So then to your question here, like how do we deal with it? How do we deal with a Saturn that's right in your face, or a Mars that's right in your face, or something like this? Well, so the way that I like to think about that is think about what those planets want to do, and then engage those in ways that can be productive for you. So one of my favorite examples is Mars as a German Shepherd in the house, right? So if you've got a German Shepherd, I'm sure this is a lovely dog who is beautiful and energetic and athletic and wonderful and catches the frisbee and all this, right? But if you leave him at home while you're working, then he's not going to know what to do with himself, and he's going to tear furniture up. That's what Mars likes to do, right? Mars likes to tear shit up. And so if you know that Mars likes to tear shit up, and you've got Mars in a super prominent place in your chart in the rising or the midheaven or conjunct the ruler of the rising or something like this, then you know that there's a propensity here to tear shit up if you don't have something to do. Something, like a German Shepherd is a shepherd, right? If you have a sheep herding dog and you've got a herd of sheep, this guy's got a job to do, that is a great dog. That's a dog that loves his life, that knows what to do, that knows where he finds himself in the hierarchy of things, that has a job to do. Mars typically likes a problem to solve. So if you've got a super strong Mars that gets you into trouble sometimes, maybe you get into fights, maybe you find yourself with a short temper or something like this, right? Like, so then it's like, okay, well, sure, I see that, and there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of like feelings that go with that. Dogs are famously full of feelings, right? And so we can recognize the reality of those feelings, and then be like, okay, so if this is a real thing, then how can we navigate this in a way that could be a little bit better than this? So if there's like, if you're generating problems for yourself because you're Marsing all over the place and it's getting in the way, then maybe you can lean into the athletic component of Mars, right? Maybe you can do some exercise and sweat it out. Maybe you can get in the sauna and Mars is going to be associated with hot things and red things. Maybe you can get super hot and red in the face and start to sweat. Mars can be sexy. That can be a good way to sort of like offload some energy or so, like to generate a good feeling in a way that gets your heart racing and this kind of thing, right? Gets passionate and stuff like this. So like, if you already know what Mars wants to do, Mars wants to solve a problem. Mars wants to run around and get out of breath and move things and that sort of stuff. Mars wants to be hot, and not only hot, but like intemperate heat, like the sort of heat that Mars is associated with the smithy and this kind of thing, right? Like smelting iron and stuff like that. So like that is too hot for everyday concerns. So how can you then, so that, then we can think about like, okay, so if it's too hot for everything, maybe then that's a good place to smelt iron or to make something useful. You can take like, there's an Orphic hymn to Mars that says, hey, take all of your martial energy and put that into the tools of agriculture. And that would be a much more useful tool to us than the tools of war, right? They're made of the same thing. They're made of the same iron. Please smelt the iron into like hoes and shovels and this kind of thing so that we can make something productive out of it, right? And so there's always something that you can do that can take the excess. And so like it's also important to remember that malefics by their nature are excessive. That's like part of what is bad about them. That's part of what is uncomfortable about them, is they go overboard. Saturn is excessively cold and bitter, right? It's not to say that cooling down sometimes isn't fun and nice, a nice thing to do. Sometimes it's nice to have a cool rag and put it on your head or something like this, right? That can be cute. That's not how Saturn gets down. Saturn is like cold plunge style, like, like doing the cold shower and be like, I just want, you can't even regulate my breath properly, this kind of thing. You know what I mean? So it's that excessive nature that characterizes the malefics. And so if you can take that system of excess and then be like, okay, where is a place to put this? Like the cold plunge is a really good example here. If you've got this strong Saturn that's going to be super cold and difficult for you to deal with, then maybe doing a cold plunge or something like that could be a good way for you to incorporate that into your MO so that you can just make the best of it.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely wonderful advice. I will just say, hilariously, I am an Aries with very strong Mars placements. I've taken up blacksmithing, so I literally have
Really?
been doing exactly that. It is a very wonderful
Love it.
thing, and I will 100% agree with you on that.
Word.
Um, yeah, it is interesting to me. I think that that's the key piece. I am the type, I completely agree with you on the malefics having very positive aspects, and that it's this. I want to just finish one thought before moving on to the next. It is that excessive pull towards the excess that can be the issue, and therefore having a way to regulate it or put it into a place, a context that is useful is very important, so that it doesn't go too far in any one direction. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of, how should I say, there's oftentimes a bit of fear around eclipses, and I think you've already
Mm-hmm.
touched on that there are times of shadow. Are you personally the type of person who recommends like not doing any magic or not doing any workings around eclipses, or what is your feeling on
Mm-hmm.
magic and eclipses?
Sure. Well, your arms are too short to box with dragons,
Sure.
and you are. Ursula Le Guin treats dragons in a way that I think is really salient. And so if you think about Earthsea, then there are dragons in Earthsea, and the idea is that dragons they like speak the language of creation, and at no point is a dragon taking orders from a human. They like think
Mhm.
it's funny that you would even consider ordering them around. Like, what are you thinking, dude? So
Cute.
so if we sort of like take a grimoire style approach to magic, which is kind of like bossing spirits around, right? Then when eclipses come, you're trying to boss around dragons, and that's not how that goes. And they think it's funny that you would try to do that, and not necessarily in a congenial kind of way. Like they think it's funny in a like, oh, maybe I should crush you now kind of way.
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
so um so I wouldn't necessarily say that one should never do any magic ever under an eclipse, because then it sort of gets into like, well, what's magic and what counts as magic and this kind of thing. I would definitely, I like a prayer, I like a mantra under eclipses and this kind of thing. I like a sauna under a south node eclipse. I think that those are, and those can be like sort of spiritual performances and moments. You can get into journeying and this kind of thing, but like the kind of like magic to do things like spirits are going around and doing stuff because I said so. um it it's likely to go off the rails. It's likely to go in a direction that you might not have predicted, and that might not go good for you.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. Which does not mean that you simply hide under the covers. It just means that you have attention to not bossing the dragons around in case they
Yeah,
don't take that very nicely.
right, exactly. And if
Mhm.
you are afraid about that, then hiding under the covers is a good way to just not fuck with it. You know what I
Sure.
mean? Like the
Yep.
sun will be back tomorrow.
Mhm.
It got ate up by the sun
Totally.
by a dragon today. He'll be back.
Yes. So we've mentioned Ursula Le Guin and creativity a couple of different times already in this interview, and I
Mhm.
have not yet touched on the fact that you are also a musician. And I really like
Oh
your
yeah.
music. And for those who are listening who don't know your music, well, there's links in the show notes. So soon you will know his music. Um, I, I kind of just want you to talk just a little bit about your music, just so that we, for those who haven't heard it yet, know what we're talking about. And then I wanted to ask you how you think about your relationship with the music that you create, with your view of magic and your spirituality, and anything you want to just kind of start us off with there.
Sure, sure. Yeah, well, so I've been doing music for as long as I have been conscious. So I've been, and I was, I think I mentioned before that I was a deeply religious youth, and I was super involved in church, and an important part of church was singing. And so I was raised in that kind of community, and so I got really good at church music for a long time, and so I have this like history of doing sacred music already. Um, and so some of the music that I make is sacred in the sort of like what you think of as sacred music, like church music and this kind of thing. There's a breath exercise which is modeled off of Wim Hof breath exercise that I just didn't like his music very much, and so I made some that was better, and I think it's more beautiful and makes for a more transcendent experience in the exhales and this kind of thing. So that's really nice. Also, there's a tune called "Thank You," which is 8 minutes long, and it's like it supports a gratitude practice. It's just like full of positive vibrations and gives you a nice feeling for 8 minutes and makes you sort of like grateful to be here in the world for that period of 8 minutes. So those are sort of like classically sacred music, and especially "Thank You" like sounds like church music in a lot of ways. But like, you know, astrology is a way of mapping the cosmos as far as time is concerned, and it's rhythmic and cyclical. And so, rhythmic cycles of timing is also how I approach music. Like, I'm not super strong with harmony, and like a lot of people are really like into like theoretical like ways of building chords and this sort of stuff. Like I am real basic with it. I do triads most of the time. Sometimes there'll be like a seventh on there or something like this. Most times not. Honestly, I just like hit a triad to death, you know. Um, but the rhythm is often fairly complex and can sort of trip people up sometimes. And so this idea of rhythmic cycles of timing, it's a little bit one of the things I've been thinking about recently is so if you think about the tropical zodiac, right? So there are three different zodiacs, right? So the what's the best way to think about this? So there is a path. So the sky, there is a sky, right? And
Yes.
in the sky there are stars, and though most of the stars stay in one spot more or less. Stuff comes up in the east and then goes through the southern sky and then goes down in the west, and so everything's moving, but relative to each other basically everything stays in the same spot. Those are called the fixed stars. Then there are the planets, which include the sun and the moon, and those move around. There's a path through which they move, and that path is called the ecliptic, and so they move against the backdrop of the fixed stars. So if you were like you are in Aries, right? So that means that you have the sun in Aries. So Aries is a space in the sky. Originally, the idea is that Aries is a constellation. And so when the sun passes through the constellation of Aries, then the sun is in Aries, right? So that's called the constellational zodiac. And then it gets a little weirder once you start talking about the sidereal zodiac versus the tropical zodiac, which is basically, you're dealing with like the wobble of the earth. And so things are like, so at this point, we have decided, and so like by we, I mean astrologers like 1,500 years ago or something like that, decided to root Aries to the spring equinox. So it's like and it's important to remember that astrology is necessarily geocentric. We can understand that it's a solar system that might be heliocentric and that might also be revolving around a galactic center or something like this. That's not the point. We are on the Earth, and so we're going to keep a geocentric mindset here, right? So if we're thinking about being geocentric, then on the Earth, spring and fall happen at a certain time, right? And that's when things are balanced. I've heard Anne Ortley say that you can put an eggshell up on its nose during the equinox moment. Have you ever done this before?
I have. It does work. I've gotten it to work a couple of times. I forget most years, but yeah.
Yeah, I and it like happens at a weird time, or you're like
Yeah, it's
at
always a
work or
really
something
odd
like this. I've
time.
never actually done it, but I've heard there's this like perfect balance moment, right?
Mhm.
And so based on that perfect balance, we know when springtime starts and when fall time starts. And so we can root Aries to that moment. So when the sun, wherever the sun is on the first day of spring, we're going to call that the beginning of Aries now, right? And so what we end up with is a kind of idealized rhythmic situation here. So between that and then also deciding that there's 30 degrees for every sign. There's 12 signs and there are 30 degrees per sign. So like Aries is a much different size from Virgo, is a much different size from Scorpio. Like Scorpio is pretty small, Virgo is pretty huge. And so they all vary in size. And so so when we're doing astrology, then we're going to take an idealized form, which is 30 degrees each, and we'll just sort of like root to that. So similarly, music has an idealized way of approaching time, right? So where all the beats are exactly the same and there's a regular rhythm in between them. And so this is interesting because I think about so like there's this idea that when settler colonialists first arrived in the Americas, then they arrived in forests that were more bountiful than they had ever seen. And it turns out that that was because the indigenous people had basically been gardening for thousands of years, and they had been gardening in a way that colonists couldn't understand properly, right? And so there's this sense of like, the forest will do what it does and it'll be fine. There might be a little bit of wobble or precession to it, but primarily shit's going to be fine. But if humans arrive on the scene, then part of what a human wants to do is to create the idealized form of whatever it is. And so the way we approach time is the same way. So once we get into music and this kind of thing, then there's this idealized form of time that then moves people's hearts and like gets people together, and it's called the universal language, and like there's the sound of it changes people's hearts, minds, souls, bodies, right? And so astrology also approaches time in this idealized sort of way that can give you, that also touches people's hearts, that also can give you some important information on how to go about living your life. So to my mind, astrology and music are the same craft. And so I approach them as such. And so I haven't like done anything, there have been projects to like John Coltrane for a second was like associating signs with keys and this kind of thing. I haven't gotten into that style of doing things, but I have noticed this way of approaching time generally. And so, that's part of what ZamboniFunk is, right? So funk is the lineage of music that I come from. Like Z funk comes after G funk, comes after P funk, right? And so like there's a straight line to me. But so funk is a style of music which is dance music. And so there's this sense of like, if you know where the beat is, then you can put your booty in the spot where your booty's supposed to be at in that moment. And so it's because you have this understanding of rhythm and timing that you can put yourself in that place. And so when I think about astrology, I think about trying to dance with the rhythm of the cosmos in the same way that I would dance to music.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's also, the same underlying thoughts behind like the music of the spheres and the various, theories that for thousands of years people have been trying to come up with, what are the key structures or what are the harmonic systems that might interplay at a larger cosmic level between the sounds that we make here and like the sounds of the heavens, which
Hmm.
is a very fascinating thing. But yeah, but a very large thing. And I agree with you that rhythm is something that does it is something that we can also all appreciate in a way that I think is universal even beyond like tonal systems, because like you were saying about like
Hmm.
you use triads and maybe some seventh chords, but also like just our idea of harmony. The whole reason why the harmony of the spheres idea, while it does have some actual relationships to cosmically what is going on, it is still much more localized in that our tonal set systems are so different around the world. So it's kind of like what we were
Hmm.
saying before, where like these things apply, but they apply differently based on where you are. Just like there's different tonal systems and different,
Hmm.
classical systems, like Indian classical music versus Western classical music versus other indigenous traditions, like ways of hearing sound are different. Yet there it seems to be some sort of universality with rhythm, where we can find a lot of the same rhythmic patterns all over the world because
Hmm.
they speak to something that is connecting us to something larger. That is very fascinating, and I really do enjoy the rhythm of your stuff is very awesome, as people will hear. So
Word. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Have you spent any time with the work of John Stuart Reed?
yes, yes, I have.
Yeah, that guy's got some ideas, right?
Oh my goodness, yes. Well,
Yeah, that he says that like sound precedes light
yeah.
and all this sort of stuff, and that like the he's sort of into this idea that vibration is the sort of fundamental uh, thing that the universe is composed of. And so everything sort of starts with the vibration. And so then if we think about vibration, then that is by its nature rhythmic, right? And then we can even think about tone and pitch, and the like the way that that works is like how close are your waveforms, you know? And so
Absolutely.
so the whole thing sort of turns into rhythm at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah. And also just everything with time, even in the time and space impacting sound, because sound waves are obviously physical and they have
Mm,
to travel, and therefore there is time involved even with pitch and what we hear, which is why music that is played live has a very different impact on the body, and music played in different spaces has a very different impact on the body, because the way that it's traveling, the distance that it's traveling, and the what it's encountering in that cyclical, what we were, just the idea of time impacting the sound itself, and our experience of it is very different, which is why I am sometimes sad when I listen to music on my little earbuds. I do it just like everyone else, even as a professional
sure.
musician. I gotta listen to something when I'm going for my run. So
Totally, totally. Yeah, I found that I used to be super snooty about it when I was in high school and stuff. I used to like always it went through the sound system, and I would like
Mhm.
shut out other sounds and stuff like this. And now I'm just like press and play on my phone and listen to it outside, you know what I mean?
we all
Like
do it. We got to
no
do it.
headphones, no nothing, just raw dogging it, you know? Like it's fine. It's
Mhm.
doing its thing. Music is so like magical and powerful that you
Oh
don't
yeah.
need all of the fancy stuff, you know? Like it's cool,
No.
it's special. And one of the things that John Stuart Reed talks about is like the impact of low frequencies. And
Oh
he
yes.
talks about like how people gravitate to like EDM and raves and this kind of thing because there's like this thumping rhythmic bass that they love, and that's like so that we love, like we as human
Yes.
beings we just
Just
love that
resonate with,
shit.
literally.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And then like well, I love this idea of resonance, right? Because there's a certain sense of like bringing your own vibration to the place where everyone else is or where the music is. Like you can entrain yourself by putting yourself in like into literal contact with physical sound waves, right? They hit your ears, yes, they do, but they also hit the rest of your body. And so when they hit the rest of your body, then you can entrain yourself to this idealized form, which then has all these different health benefits that are easily noticeable because you love it. And so So I really love that whole situation there. And that he actually was, I was reading a bunch of John Stewart Reed at the time that I made Breathe, the breath exercise. So I made sure to put like thick, heavy thumping bass to go with the breath exercise because I thought that it would be a better way of entraining health and spirituality
I
through
have
that
off
practice.
Yeah, I have oftentimes explained people like the idea of entrainment with how you can entrain metronomes, you can synchronize them,
Yeah,
because there's that, and it's absolutely wild. So
amazing.
magic in action. If you want to do the experiment with a few metronomes, it is amazing to sort of see and hear them synchronize. And that is something that is a mechanistic example of something that is fundamental to a universal truth that we are 100% in our bodies doing all the time. Hence magic. What?
Right. Totally.
Yeah. Well, that is fascinating. Is there anything in particular that kind of going a little bit more back to the vision of astrology from, just like, but what do I do on Saturday? Is it a good day for that or not? Do you think about when you
Hmm.
release music based on what's going on in the
Oh yeah.
astrology, or you just, yes, okay. I
Hell yeah.
figured I but
Yeah,
I
yeah. There's a whole branch of my practice that is dedicated to electional astrology.
Mhm. Yeah.
Kind of like the first kind of magic that I started doing was Picatrix talismanic magic, and so
Mhm.
it was very convenient that right when I got into that, Jupiter was in Sagittarius and was like, "Here, how about some gifts?" So so I just like made a whole bunch of Jupiter and Sagittarius talismans and this kind of thing. So the way that that practice works is you look for a moment in the sky when Jupiter in Sagittarius, for example, is in perfect position or in the best position possible. Typically, this is going to be on the rising or on the midheaven. Usually, the moon is going to be in some kind of aspect to Jupiter and then also not in aspect to malefics, ideally with an aspect to Venus as well. or the sun or something like this. And so you've like got this moment where it's like looks really beautiful, and then you take that energy and you like say a prayer to Jupiter and you carve an image of Jupiter onto a stone that's associated with Jupiter. And so you like take all the different layers of being, from the cosmic, from the celestial level down to the human level, down to the plant level, and you take all and you carve an image into a stone down to the mineral level, right? And through that you can affect some change in the world, right?
Mhm.
So that was the very first style of magic that I started doing. And now, like, so if you go to Patreon, and I have a Patreon as well, and so a major fixture of my Patreon is I do a an electional report every month where there I list every day, and some of them have a little green light next to them, and it's like, ooh, here's a nice time to do your thing. And some of them have a red light next to them, which is like, maybe don't launch your thing during the eclipse or something like that.
Yeah.
And so electional astrology is super important to my whole practice. And it's part of like the way that I make astrology useful as well, right? So if we think about astrology as being the shape of time, like, so because I have a natal chart, sure, but the stars continuously move. They've been moving this whole time. And so they are currently in a position as well. And this current position speaks to whatever's going on in it, it's big sort of like as above so below kind of energy, right? So like whatever's going on there can tell you about what's going on here. And so if there's a bunch of blockage and obstacle and stuff in the sky, then you probably don't want to launch your business at that moment because it's going to be a more difficult time or whatever, right? And so yeah, all of my music launches have been elected, and lots of other things too. I use elections for almost everything that I do.
Mhm. Do you notice, I mean, we're both musicians, we both compose. Do you notice any connection between times when you feel particularly like creatively, um, I don't know, if more things are sort of happening for you creatively? Do you think that that's more just like personal to your chart, or do you also feel like there's a flow and a timing to that based on what's going on with the astro weather?
Sure. So um yes is the answer to your question.
Yeah.
um So like they're going to be so like I've been talking publicly about because I do forecasts as well. So one of
Mhm.
the things that I have said about Saturn in Pisces, especially Saturn in Pisces making a sextile to Jupiter in Taurus, is that that's really nice for creativity and stuff. But if you've got the sun or the moon in early Pisces just getting Saturned, you know what I mean? Like Saturn on the moon is not a particularly fun time. That it tends to be like kind of lethargic. Maybe you've got some kind of like bodily problem that you have to get over. You have trouble feeding yourself or something like this, you know? And so maybe you're having trouble feeding yourself because you're like in the creative flow moment. Or maybe, like you've got an autoimmune condition that makes it difficult that makes you shit too much or something like this, right? Shout out to celiac. So, um, so it's going to depend on your natal chart for sure. There's also like planetary hours, so there's this concept where like the hours go. So you start counting at sunrise, and the day of the week correlates with a certain planet, and so the first hour of the day correlates with that planet, and then every hour. I don't need to run through the whole calculation, but it goes in order of slowest to fastest planets. I think that's called reverse Chaldean order, and it so there in that order. Then there's a certain one where it goes Sun, Venus, Mercury, all in a row, and so again, assuming that you don't have Mercury conjunct Saturn or Venus conjunct Saturn or Mars or something like get something in the way, right? Assuming that you don't have something in the way, that 3 hour period of Sun, Venus, Mercury, that's a nice smooth sailing period. So if you can sort of get your get everything together so you're ready to flow in that moment, that's something that you can do. And that's something that you can do like kind of without paying too much attention to like what's going on with the space weather. You don't necessarily have to have spend a bunch of time with the forecasting and like look at the chart and see what the chart says, and like because that can get to be a lot of work and a lot of steps to do. But if you can just pay attention to that and be like, oh, it's sun hour, I've got 3 hours of smooth sailing here, so let me go ahead and do that, then that can be a good thing to do.
I am a huge fan of planetary hours. I completely agree. It does help, even on in the times when it is a little more tricky with other stuff. That is always helpful. So,
Yeah. And
um,
like sometimes you got to just do it,
yeah.
you know? Like which is something I've done. Like thank you for example. I had a really nice election for thank you. And I the it's a song that I wrote, and it didn't like the I couldn't get other people to like the mastering engineer didn't get back to me on time, and so I just had it, and it was after my date, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna wait for a whole, like it was troublesome. It was troublesome skies ahead, and so I was like, I'm not gonna wait for that long, so I'm just gonna make something work. And sometimes you got to do that, and like you can't make yourself crazy with it. You can make yourself crazy with you, so maybe you shouldn't do
Oh,
that.
yes. Yes, we can, but we should not. So, yes.
Right.
Um, I am there is so much that we could talk about, and I want to have you back on, of course, to talk about this. Is there something that you feel that you oftentimes see people misunderstand about astrology or people miss about the art that you would like to kind of share with people? Maybe a misunderstanding that you sometimes encounter, or just something that you feel very particularly called to kind of tell people about this.
Interesting question. Um, well, I think people frequently hmm, 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 hmm.
Tricky, I know.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I want to say that astrology doesn't need to be as complicated as it seems like it should be. But in the era of astrology memes, I think we should introduce a little more complexity than the
Yeah.
essentialized form that we get in the memes. and like I like astrology memes as much as the next guy. You know what I mean? Like, show me a picture of a Cancer crying. I love that shit. But at the same time, like there's just more, there's more to it than that. So, but then at the same time, there's like a kind of, I wonder if it's like, because I'm at a point now where I've done like 9,500 readings or something like this, right? So there's a kind of simplicity that I've found that is, like I kind of like know my way around it a little bit. And so I wonder if that might be part of what I'm thinking about. Like, you don't need to overcomplicate it. And in fact, one of the things that I learned in one of those purple books that I had originally was a Stephen Forrest book called Inner Sky. And in that book, what he said that I thought was brilliant, that I continue to think is brilliant, is that there's too much information in the chart. And this is kind of like getting back to what you were saying before, is that like, how do you draw the whole picture? Is you don't. You don't try to draw the whole picture. The goal of a good astrology reader is to choke off the flow of information until it's digestible. So only enough information that I need, only enough information that I can handle, that I can turn into something that is useful. And so like finding, so like, the looking at all the asteroids and all the like, the timing techniques and all that, like there's a lot of like interesting stuff that can be done that way. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't use asteroids or secondary progressions or whatever, solar arcs, whatever you like, right? Do those things, but fewer tools tends to be more effective at delivering readings that are intelligible than more tools tends to be. One of the things that I think is important in an astrology reading is just to like say something that makes sense rather than listing a bunch of technical jargon. So that I think is a pretty important thing to think about with astrology, is like getting less information is a good way to do it. Another thing that like might be important is go outside sometimes. Like, look at the sky, like there's astrologers, for like the way that we got astrology in the first place was generations and generations of people would look at the sky, notice where things were in the sky, take note of them, and then also note what was going on politically, and then take note of that, and then find correlations across an extremely long period of time. And so we have the opportunity to participate in that tradition by looking at the sky. And so you can look at the chart. And so like, this is something that Chris Brennan does a lot, is like look at the chart and then look at what's been going on historically, or like what's, excuse me, whatever's been coming up in the news and this kind of thing. And then be like, oh, like these things go together. Right. But like, also, if you can just look at the sky sometimes, then like, if we magical people think that mind is distributed throughout the universe, and that maybe there is some kind of mind or consciousness that exists in the planets, then you can directly interface with that by looking at the planet, right? So like, in the moment when you can see a planet, there's literally nothing in between you and that planet. I mean, there's air and atmosphere and whatever, right? But like, there's a straight line, an extremely long, an incomprehensibly long straight line directly to that celestial body. And you can participate in a relationship with that celestial body by gazing at it. Maybe it's gazing at you too.
I could not agree more. It is very easy to forget that when we have a lot of charts and a lot of, lovely ways to sort of allow us to do these very complex, mathematical equations in much easier forms, and we don't have to do all of that. But yeah, the going out and
Mm-hmm.
having a relationship with what is up there is a lot different from just staring at a chart on a piece of paper
Yeah,
or a
and it
computer
helps
screen.
to contextualize the chart also.
Yes.
Like, cuz I'm no mathematician, right? Like I am, and that's one of the things that's really nice about astrology software is that it sort of introduces the poets back into the practice of doing astrology, right? So it's like not only math nerds who can then to create a chart in the first place and then read it after that, right? So which is the way that astrology was done. The Greek word for astrology is mathematician, right? Like it's the same thing. So like it used to only be math nerds who even had access to the information. Now I am more poetry and music and feelings and like love and whatever, right? You know, like I've been doing drugs and shit for a long time. So like in a way the mathematicians are not at least famous for. And so I I have something like I really appreciate the ability to
Oh yes.
do the to just cast a chart on astro.com for free, for fucking free. I've like got a whole career behind me at this point that, and I haven't paid for an astrology software yet. Like I use astro.com just like everyone else does. And
Mhm.
so I really love that. And so
Yeah.
then looking at that chart, and then sometimes it's like useful to look at the chart of the moment and then be like, okay, what does this look like outside? And then go outside and face the south, because that's what the chart is showing you. Face the south and be like, what's happening here? Can I find Mars? Mars is supposed to be over there somewhere. Can I find it? Or this kind of thing, right? And just to get ourselves a little more comfortable with what's actually happening in the world and not just what's coming out of the screen.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really beautiful and wonderful advice. I am very excited to be sharing links with people of all of your stuff. Is there anything you want to share with people about what you offer or, what you've got coming up? What would you?
Sure. Yeah, I do too many things. So you can find all of them at ZamboniFunk.com. So there's like a central hub there for the stuff. So I do forecasts. So you can find me on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube doing daily and weekly forecasts. I
Which are
also
great, and people absolutely should be following you on Instagram because I do. So,
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, so I do those forecasts, and you can check those out. I also do readings, so you can get a Zoom reading where we talk for half an hour or an hour and like about your chart. I also do 10-minute readings where they're pre-recorded like my weeklies are. So I just like will spend 10 minutes looking at your chart and talking about what's going on here. I also do the electional report that I mentioned before. You can find that on Patreon. Also on Patreon, there's an Astro Basics course that is about to get revamped in a pretty big way. I've been writing a book for a little while on like turning astrological imagery into resonant images, and so I've been working on that for a little while, and so there's about to be a next version, a revised version of that course that will be coming out, and the patrons will have first access to that. Um, there is also a bunch of music. So if you go to Spotify, Tidal, Pandora, Apple Music, wherever you like to get your music at, then you can just search up Zamboni Funk. That's Zamboni Funk, all together, one word, and just put it in there to your search bar, and you can find a whole bunch of music. I'm super proud, and I made my first album or my first record under this name in April of 2022 last year, and then and then at the beginning of the year this year, I was like, I am done working on tunes. I'm finishing tunes this year. 2023 is the year of finishing tunes. And since then, I've completed 10 new songs this year. So there's a whole bunch of music that you will be able to find there. It's pretty diverse. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's some like R&B and soul. There's some reggae. The most recent record that I put out is a hip hop record. It's my first time rapping on record. So that is pretty dope. I'm pretty excited about it. I would love it if you would listen to that music and put it on a playlist or seven. And I'm sure that there's some
that's
other
a lot.
shit that I do also. I always forget when it comes to this
Oh,
part.
I totally
There's like
understand.
so many things. But
Well, and we'll put stuff in the show notes and people can find you all those different places. And I am really thankful for your time and for all the stuff that you do and all the stuff that you put out there and the music you put out there, which is awesome. And I can't wait
oh my
to
goodness,
talk
thank you so much
another
for
time.
having me. I'm so delighted to be a part of this. Thanks so much.
Yay. All right. Well, thanks. We will talk again soon.
You got it.
Mm.